This video is aimed to talk you through how to answer explain questions in the exam. These are a really common question used throughout both papers 1 and 2, and therefore it's worthwhile getting very familiar with them and understanding how to achieve the top marks. In terms of having some rules for these, think about when we've talked about them in class this year, and you should be able to remember some of these rules. The first one is that anytime you see an explain command word, it means give reasons. So you've got to give reasons for something. Generally, these explain questions are worth 3 or 6 marks. So if that's the case, obviously a 3-mark question, you can use your point, explain, expand 1 mark for each of the things or each of the sentences that you say, and that is a good guideline for you. Obviously, if we have a 6-mark explain question, we're looking to use 2 point, explain, expands in there. Over the last couple of years, it has become increasingly popular to see 4-mark explain questions. Again, adopt your point, explain, expand structure, but often think that you need to add in an additional point or additional point explain to move up to get those 4 marks. It wouldn't be as much as 2 point explain expands as a 6-mark question, but we do need to see a little bit more than just our traditional point explain expand, but we'll look at some examples of that later on. The last tip or rule I would give you for answering these explain questions is that you've got to think about ways of showing the examiner the high level of geographical knowledge that you have. And the pointer for this is that you've got to use terminology or use specific terminology. So if it was asking you to explain, for example, why the Earth's plates move, rather than saying the magma moves, you would need to use the phrase convection currents to hit up into top level 3. But again, we'll look at that whenever we deal with some examples in a wee second. Okay, the rest of the video now is looking at giving you some example questions, both from physical and human papers, and worth a range of marks. It's a good idea, if you're confident, to pause the video now, have a go at answering the question, and then come back, press play, and have a look at the mark schemes. So again, we can see that this question has the explain command word, and it's relating to rainfall on wet ground and the impact that will have on the discharge of the river. So again, as we've talked about before, we're looking for that point, explain, expand structure. So I would say something like the discharge of the river will increase as my point. This is because rain falling on wet ground will not infiltrate into the soil as my explain, and my expand would be that this means the rainfall makes its way to the river as surface runoff, increasing discharge for the 3 marks. Let's have a look at the mark scheme in relation to that. So for 3, the examiners use a slightly different phrase than we do, but statement would really be RP, consequence would be RE, and elaboration would be RE. So that's why we have tried to teach you to use this point, explain, expand approach. If you have a look at their answer, slightly different structures of what I suggested, but you can see how it relates really closely to our example. Question 2, it's about this weather vane picture. Again, explain is the command word, how the instrument works, 3 marks. We're looking for point, explain, expand. You can pause the video now, have a go at the question, press play, and have a look at the mark scheme. Level 3, different terminology again in the mark scheme here. They've just gone for bland, very detailed statement. We know from our work in school that details should relate to point, explain, expand, and you can see the example answer here, which again has probably this sentence as point, this sentence as explain, and this sentence as expand. Example question 3, same approach, explain command word. Earthquakes are caused at this type of plate boundary, and the plate boundary in relation to this question was a destructive plate boundary, but you could equally practice this question for any of the 3 plate boundaries. So you can pause it now and have a go at the question. Mark scheme for that question. They have used the phrase full explanation. We'll just use that to mean point, explain, expand. You can see 2 plates collide as the point. Stress or pressure builds up due to friction between the plates as they explain, and so the plates move suddenly and shake the rock, sending out shock waves, creating an earthquake as they expand. Point, explain, expand once again. Question 4, the crust of the earth is divided up into plates. Explain as the command word. Are able to move. Once again, we're looking at point, explain, expand for our 3 marks. Pause the video, have a go. Here's the mark scheme. Fits nicely with our prep. Statement, consequence, elaboration, and once again we know that means point, explain, expand. Have a look at the example answer. The point is plates can move because they rest on the molten magma of the mantle. The explain is which move in convection currents so that where magma rises the plates are pulled apart, and then they've expanded on it in brackets this time. So again, a different approach but same format in terms of what we've talked about in class. Here's our 6 mark question. Explains the command word. Birth rates are often low in MEDCs, and we can see here 6 marks. So if we think about what we've talked about in our prep, point, explain, expand, number 1, and then point, explain, expand, number 2 to get your 6 marks. Pause the video, have a go at the question. Here's the mark scheme. So an answer which explains 2 causes with good elaboration that relates to MEDCs. So once again, 2 causes, point, explain, expand. Example answers are there so you can check your answer that you've come up with. Talked earlier on about this idea that sometimes we see explain questions having 4 marks, and this is an example of that. Command words explain. Small settlements can only support low order services. So in terms of our approach, we'll start off with a point, explain, expand. So you'll say something like small settlements can only support low order services because they have a low population. This means the threshold population is not met for higher order services, so they can't exist in this area. I would then develop that a little bit further by adding in an additional point. Because these settlements are so small, they will have a small range, and then you'll explain that by saying this means people won't travel long distances to use services here. That should get you your 4 marks. Okay, you can see a discussion that mentions the ideas of threshold, sphere of influence, and range, and we've talked a little bit about that in our examples, and this is probably a good point to illustrate the idea that we've got to use terminology just to reinforce that. These 3 key ideas: threshold, sphere of influence, and range. Question 7 is our final example. Just thought it was worth mentioning this type of explain question as well. Sometimes the examiners use explain along with a case study. So you can see the phrase here, an LEDC you have studied. So this is obviously our fishing case study from India. They're asking for 6 marks. So again, your structure would be stating which case study it is that you're studying, point, explain, expand, and then again you'll have a second point, explain, expand. Okay, so that's your structure for this. If you just go back up, sorry, I pressed the wrong button. If you just go back up and have a look at the question, It actually goes a little bit further, and it mentions economic and environmental improvements. So obviously our examination techniques tells us that this first PE must relate to economic improvements, and our second PE must relate to environmental. So now would be a good time for you to pause the video, have a go at writing an answer to this, and then you can have a look at the mark scheme here. Once again, thorough explanation, economic and environmental improvements, and it's saying 2 fact figures relating to their case study, and we would know that the point experience band should have fact figure in it. Just include one, you're getting 5 marks, get the 2 of them in to push yourself up to the 6.